woman astronaut, and the shuttle has cleared the tower.
Roger, roll, Delta. Houston now controlling. Mission control confirms roll maneuver starting. 20 seconds. Rough, looking good. 25 seconds. Roll maneuver.
In June 1983, Sally Ride became the first American woman astronaut to fly in space. Her milestone flight came 22 years, 57 astronauts, and 37 manned missions after Alan Shepard made America's first suborbital space flight. Hello, I'm Nichelle Nichols. When I played Chief Communications Officer Uhura aboard the Starship Enterprise, I was hailed as a pioneering woman astronaut. In the late 70s, my consultant firm, Women in Motion, contracted with NASA to recruit the very first women and minority astronauts for the Space Shuttle program. This is the story of the first 8 women in the American space program and the effects they had on the future of women in space. The story of women's efforts to become astronauts actually begins at the birth of NASA.
Well, initially when we chose astronauts, we wanted people who were willing to subject themselves to the rigors of flying in space as well as the dangers of flying in space. And so it was our feeling that the people that could do that job satisfactorily were test pilots. They were used to flying in high-performance machines daily, used to putting their lives on the line, used to making decisions when their lives were on the line.
"115 military jet test pilots were initially selected by an infant NASA to be tested as potential astronauts. This number was trimmed down to 32 pilots who were sent for medical testing to the Loveless Clinic in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Dr. W. Randolph Lovelace was without question one of the world's foremost authorities on high-altitude aviation medicine, having developed the test for U-2 spy plane pilots in the mid-1950s. Lovelace and his colleagues developed over 75 separate medical tests to give to these astronaut hopefuls. After being probed, jabbed, poked, electroshocked, squeezed, and scrutinized by the Loveless Clinic staff, many of the pilots described these tests as sheer torture, and some pilots even passed out.
At the end of a very long 7 to 10 days, these chaps were then sorted out and sent on to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where psychological testing was carried out. Outstanding people that I remember are Alan Shepard, because he was a little bit difficult to keep regimented in this very regimented program that we had. I remember Deke Slayton. I remember Gus Grissom, because these are people that I personally examined.
Many additional tests were given to these pilots in other parts of the country to determine their stamina and courage. The 7 best test pilots that the military had to offer were finally chosen as astronauts in April 1959.
I believe this was probably the most dangerous period of space flight, because the spaceships that we were flying were not particularly reliable. We had lost the Mercury Atlas 1 and 3 missions. Prior to the John Glenn, we had had problems on several of the Atlases. The technology was very primitive at that period of time.
I think that the whole makeup of our society is that you shouldn't have a woman doing that kind of scary, risky stuff. And this was just kind of another reflection of that same basic flawed thought that we happen to live with in 30 years ago.
The same year that these pilots were chosen as astronauts, pioneer aviatrix Jackie Cochran, who was the first woman to break the sound barrier, approached her good friend and colleague, Dr. Loveless, about the possibility of testing women pilots to become astronauts.
She became a burr under Randy Lovelace's shirt until he agreed to try. And she was so insistent that even though there could be no official sponsorship of that interest, in fact, there was official opposition to it, Jackie agreed to pay for the recruitment and the testing of female candidates.
In great secrecy, Lovelace first tested pilot Jerry Cobb, who held numerous altitude and speed records. Cobb performed so well in comparison with the men that Loveless and Cochran handpicked over a dozen additional women pilots to test at the clinic.
But certainly we had the capacity to evaluate them in a similar fashion to the examinations that were done for the male astronauts. They were basically the same. The period was not extensive between the two examination of the two, and we had not torn down any of the equipment, and none of the people involved originally had gone from the clinic, so that it was basically the same examination.
The tests that the lady candidates endured were similar in every respect to what was done for the male candidates.
I really wanted to apply the test and to see if the theory was correct, that they were capable of the same feats that the men were.
My recollection is that the women were equally qualified with the men candidates, and they were just as tough psychologically, and they were just as qualified physically as any of the male candidates. And they were women of very evident courage and very evident motivation. I'd say their motivation was just as powerful as that of the men candidates that we got to know.
Dr. Loveless was so impressed with the performance of these women that he went on public record in 1960 saying women would be superior to men as potential astronauts. However, in July 1961, NASA abruptly canceled all further consideration of women as potential astronaut candidates and dashed the hopes of all women to participate in the astronaut corps for the next 2 decades. Jane Hart, one of the women pilots tested at the Loveless Clinic, would not accept NASA's arbitrary decision. She convinced her husband, U.S. Senator Philip Hart from Michigan, to push for a congressional hearing on the qualification requirements for astronauts, which was eventually held in July 1962. At these hearings, Jane Hart, Jerry Cobb, and Jackie Cochran introduced the test results and pictures from the Loveless Clinic, indicating clearly that the women's physical, medical, and mental qualifications were equal to that of the men's, warranting further testing and training of women. They also testified that NASA was inherently discriminatory, since only men were able to become military jet test pilots, a basic requirement to becoming an astronaut. At that time, women were not allowed to fly jets in the military, and there were no civilian jet test pilot opportunities available to women. Cobb noted that millions of dollars out of the NASA budget were spent for the testing and training of dozens of chimpanzees for space travel, but not one penny was even considered to be devoted to testing or training women. Cobb even offered to take the place of one of the chimps. However, as a result of the testimony of NASA officials and astronauts, the Congressional Committee decided to accept NASA's position to not accept women as astronauts into the space program at that time.
The space program probably was a microcosm of what was going on in America as a total society, in the sense that early on, the workforce was essentially all male, essentially all white male, practically. And that was certainly true of the astronaut corps. It was certainly true of the people in the control center and most of the people who worked at the center.
In June 1963, the Russians put an end to the question of whether or not women could withstand the rigors of space flight when cosmonaut Valentina Tereshkova was sent up and orbited the Earth for 3 days. In fact, her flight lasted longer than all of the American astronauts' flight time combined. Tereshkova was not a military jet test pilot, not an engineer, nor a scientist. She did not have an advanced education and was not even a pilot.
I recall the flight of the first woman, Russian cosmonaut, and I remember kind of scoffing at it. You know, it's just a stunt. They were trying to make a point or something, that she had problems. You know, she got sick and she didn't feel good and she wanted to get home and get down, and I don't even know whether any of that was true, but at least those were that was the hallway talk, that, you know, yeah, the Russians put them up, but boy, it was a disaster.
Throughout the 1960s, the American space program was devoted primarily to the moon race with the Russians. NASA's only goal at that time was to plant the American flag on the moon. There was no discussion at all of women joining the space program.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
By the early 1970s, however, NASA began designing and planning the reusable shuttle spacecraft.
This looks like a good time for some good news here. The House passed the space budget yesterday, 277 to 60, which includes a vote for the shuttle.
NASA determined that the new shuttle would not only be a vehicle to take payloads in orbit, but would also be a place to conduct a wide variety of increasingly complex and technical scientific and medical experiments.
We envisioned it as being a routine operation for getting people into the environment of zero gravity and a perfect vacuum, and the utilization of that in both the scientific and commercial ventures. So we were looking for people of a whole new cross-section of our country as compared to just the limited test pilots that we had in the early days of spaceflight.
At first, many people thought that NASA's new efforts to recruit women and minorities into the astronaut corps was nothing more than a publicity stunt, and there were relatively few applications. As a result of my high visibility portraying both a woman and a minority astronaut in Star Trek, NASA convinced me that I could make a significant contribution to the recruitment of women and minority astronauts. As part of my contract, I contacted and went to universities and aerospace corporations to give speeches. I made public service announcements and commercials, and I appeared on TV and radio talk shows and did whatever was necessary to identify qualified individuals and encourage them to apply for shuttle astronaut training.
Mainly we were wanting people who were very bright, but who worked with each other, who had a good sense of humor, who would try different things and had, by evidence of their experience and education, demonstrated they had tried different disciplines and had been involved in different work. We also wanted people who wanted to work in the space program, who this was a real internal desire of theirs, because we knew it was going to be tough.
The moment I heard that NASA was accepting applications from women for the astronaut program, I applied right away. In fact, I read a small announcement in the Stanford Daily, the Stanford University newspaper. NASA had put out ads to a lot of universities because this was new. They had never accepted women, and they wanted to recruit women and minorities to apply. They were afraid they wouldn't get any applications.
It was very rewarding at that time to get as many people applying for the job as we did. We ended up with about 12,000 people who were reasonably qualified for the job, and that was very rewarding that we had that many people interested.
We narrowed it down to a group of several hundred. We invited these people in for interviews, and at that time they got their medical examinations.
The findings by NASA in 1978 that women medically qualified for space travel just as well as the men ultimately vindicated the pioneering visions of Dr. Lovelace, who made identical findings back in 1960.
The interview itself, the personal interview, which is probably the most significant factor in making final judgments, is, I think, about an hour and a half long. I didn't time mine. It was not a peppering set of questions of great detail as much as a probing of you and how you see yourself. As I recall, it was, well, tell us about yourself. Start with high school. And that was it.
I think what we had in our minds at the time was about 15 people to select out of the 12,000. But when we saw the quality of people that we got applying, and when we saw the tremendous acceptance in the country of what we were trying to do, we realized in the final days that there were just so many good people that we expanded the number.
We selected 35 astronauts in the first group, and there were 6 of those astronauts that were women. In the second group, we had 2 women that were selected in that group.
The 6 women astronauts chosen in 1978 were to be trained as mission specialists. They were Dr. Sally Ride, a research physicist, Dr. Judith Resnick, an electrical engineer, Dr. Catherine Sullivan, an oceanographic geologist, Anna Fisher, MD, an emergency room physician, Ray Seddon, MD, a surgeon, and Dr. Shannon Lucid, a biochemist. 2 of the women who applied in 1978 but were not chosen reapplied again in 1980 and were finally accepted. They were Dr. Bonnie Dunbar, a materials scientist and systems engineer, and Dr. Mary Cleve, a sanitation engineer.
So when NASA announced that they were going to take on some more people, those of us who were standing in line to fly already didn't think that was a really swift idea. You always feel like the shorter the line, the better your chances are. And then we were surprised when we found out how many they took.
Once this new group of 35 astronaut candidates came to NASA in 1978, there were serious questions on just how the male astronauts would react to these women.
So we had a lot of women distributed throughout the NASA program, but it was still a real change to have women introduced into the flight program.
I saw cases where I thought some of the older astronauts were not exactly on board with women being in the astronaut corps. And, you know, you have to sense that and feel it. Not that these people stood up and said, I don't like them and I want them out of here. None of that at all. But there was, you could just sense tension and so forth.
I think it was a big question mark. I think most of the men that we worked with in the astronaut program sort of had a wait-and-see attitude. And we had to prove that we were willing to work hard, that we were serious people, that we didn't expect them to carry our equipment for us, that we were willing to do the work that was here, and that this was something that we were really excited about.
In a lot of ways, you would think that both of us being astronauts would be really interesting and really fun because we would know what each other was doing. That's the good side of it. The bad side of it is that she comes up with commitments that she has got to go take care of and has to go do at the same time that I have commitments that I can't get out of, that I can't reschedule and adjust to. And so it makes life kind of difficult for us. And that's not a complaint, that's just the way it is.
The image of an astronaut for a lot of people didn't include women, but we ourselves didn't have that problem. They'd been there as long as we had, and so we simply made others aware of the fact that oh, by the way, in this group, not all the astronauts are men, so if you haven't made some allowance for the fact that we have some women, you need to.
Pretty much in our office, you know, we were all treated equally, and we were treated basically based on, you know, what you could do, and it just was not treated like we were some separate category.
For at least 4 years, All of these new astronauts followed a diverse regimen of rigorous physical, technical, and classroom training, as well as learning all about the shuttle and space program in general.
So a day is never typical. You may fly part of a day or a whole day, and then the next day be in meetings, and the next day be in the simulator for 4 hours, and then supporting an EVA in the water tank for training the next day. 40-hour weeks I haven't seen for many, many years.
There's classes on space shuttle, on how NASA works, on management techniques, how to deal with the media, you know, some of those kind of courses. And then there's for those of us who hadn't flown in jets before, learning how not to be a pilot, but just how to function and talk on the radios in the T-38 aircraft.
Anna turned out to be a very, very energetic, intelligent, very aggressive. She was a quick learn and seemed to enjoy flying as much as I did. And so we spent a good bit of time in the cockpit, and she became an outstanding aviator. I'd trust her anywhere. She certainly earned all of my confidence. First thing I knew, I had come to have a great deal of respect for her professional capabilities.
Judy Resnick, for example, she was real particular about having everything set up before you even walked out the door. Whenever Judy and I would go out for aerobatic maneuvers, as soon as the gear came up, which was right after takeoff, you'd get a resounding yahoo out of her because she was really excited about this flight, and she would really get going, and that was probably the most animated of anybody that I would fly with.
As far as the training, I would say as women it was a little more difficult just because of their size. They had more of a challenge. They were smaller, but they held up. They stayed with everything, and I never heard them complain, never. They were always right in there, and I never heard anyone say that any of them were not keeping up.
Early in the training of these first women astronaut candidates, Kathy Sullivan was chosen to train as the first woman to perform procedures outside the shuttle, known as EVA.
Underwater training for EVA is it's the most effective way we can train somebody for it. It's both a lot of hard work, a fair amount of discomfort, and a tremendous amount of fun. The suit is fundamentally not a very comfortable thing to be in, especially in 1G. It's got hard points to it. It knows how it wants certain things done, and it trains you how to work with its natural constraints and geometries and limitations to do what you think you need done. But it's not a device you want to try to be bullheaded in, because the suit will win, as a general rule.
Kathy Sullivan was the first EVA female astronaut that I had the pleasure to train with. She was not going to jeopardize the EVA for her being a woman. She was concerned with that, and she worked out much harder with her hands and upper body. I think she worked so hard that she was probably in better shape for that flight than her EVA crewmate.
Sally Ride and Judy Resnick were given the assignment of developing and training with shuttle hardware, such as the new remote manipulator arm designed for retrieving satellites and other objects on orbit.
There was a period of time when she and I were the two main astronauts that were working on that system. I worked on it first and then basically handed it over to her, and there was a period of time when she and I overlapped and worked very, very closely together on it.
All of these astronauts were assigned to projects according to their talents and abilities, with some projects less visible than others, but no less important.
Working with the guys in the class, there were a number of them that were really helpful. It was funny because I was a sanitary engineer, so they really didn't know what to do with me at first, until the potty broke on the first shuttle flight, and then all of a sudden everybody wanted to be real helpful and get me into this thing full time so I could go fix the potty, which was, it sounds funny, but it was a good assignment.
Gradually, we noticed that people started accepting the fact that women were part of the group and that they were to be treated the way you would treat any other astronaut, not as novelties, not as pets, not as publicity stunts, but that they were for real and that they were going to do the same job everybody else did and had to be given both the same privileges and the same responsibilities.
As the months of hard training went by, there was an increasing awareness that the performance of these highly qualified women was being watched more and more closely, and that one of them would eventually be chosen to be the first American woman in space.
The issue in the first 6 women of who was going to fly first wasn't something we all talked about at all. I think we all realized that we were competing in a loose sense, you know, for that. But I think we realized that it really wasn't something that we had a lot of control over.
We were thrown into the same stew pot all together all at once, and certainly were united on an absolutely unambiguous level by the knowledge that we all wanted this to succeed. And much more important than who goes first to all of us was the issue of this needs to succeed. We all know we can do this. The first step, the first mission will be everybody's important touchstone, and that's got to go right.
The first 6 shakedown flights of the shuttle successfully proved its reusability and usefulness as a satellite launcher. The goal of the 7th flight was to test the ability of the remote manipulator system.
On that particular flight, the 7th flight of the space shuttle, we were looking for an individual that had demonstrated good capability with a remote manipulator arm, and that the operator had to have good proficiency with the arm. And as it turned out, Sally had trained and worked with the arm during its development, and turned out to be probably one of the better operators we had for the arm.
At about the same time Sally Ride was told she was to be the first American woman in space, Russia upstaged America again, when in August 1982, cosmonaut Svetlana Savitskaya was launched into space with the crew of Soyuz T-7. Savitskaya's main duties during this flight were to perform the life sciences experiments which dealt with space sickness and cardiovascular blood flow.
The Russians had sent a woman into orbit in 1963. So they had actually sent a woman into space a very long time before we did. When I was first named to the flight in 1982 to fly in 1983, I hadn't really thought very much about the fact that the Russians had put a woman up. There was a lot of interest in the first American woman going up, but it wasn't really seen as competition.
For every launch of a shuttle, almost every aspect of the entire mission had been experienced in simulators hundreds of times before. But once launch day came for each of these women astronauts, it still evoked the excitement of anticipation and the nervousness of the unknown.
Our flight was early in the morning, 7 o'clock launch, so all the high-intensity lights are shining on the shuttle, and it's sitting out there gleaming on the pad. And you see the steam and all of that coming off, and you realize this is really your launch morning, and it's just such an exciting feeling. Certainly you're a little nervous, you know, you're wondering how it's all going to go.
As I'm going up the elevator or walking on the vehicle or strapping into my seat, I'm always thinking ahead. What's coming next? What do I need to be prepared for? The launch itself is, for me, a little scary. There's a lot of noise, a lot of vibration, and you're really aware of the fact that there are all kinds of pieces and parts that all have to hang in there. And I think, you know, I almost hold my breath that first 2 minutes while you're on the boosters, because that's when it's really exciting and there's a lot of stuff going on. After the boosters come off, it's a much smoother ride, and so you're sort of less aware of the machinery.
I dream of reaching the rings of Saturn, feel like climbing the Milky Way. I trip the light over Earth's horizon, watching the clouds and the oceans play. High over planet Earth, right before my eyes, I can fly, and like a comet on
The unique ability for the space shuttle to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere and land like an airplane no doubt cleared the road to the stars.
I spent a large portion of my engineering career working on the thermal protection system for the space shuttle and running it through tests on the ground. And this is an opportunity when you're on the flight deck to actually see the plasma glow around the vehicle as it re-enters due to the re-entry heating, to know that those tiles are protecting us against 2,300 degree Fahrenheit heat. Watch the plasma glow as it changes colors because that's associated with temperature. So you may see it at one point, white, pink, red, rose-colored, orange.
The weather was just beautiful during the landing. We actually were supposed to land in Florida at the Kennedy Space Center, but the weather was awful there, so we got diverted into California and landed at Edwards Air Force Base. And Bob Crippen took over just after the space shuttle went subsonic, slowed down below Mach 1, and it was an absolutely beautiful landing. I remember that I didn't even know when the wheels had touched down. He landed it so smoothly.
We celebrate in mission control for the shuttle program when the crew actually walks down and have their feet back on Earth for shuttle. So the key thing is this business that we're in is absolutely intolerant of carelessness, neglect, incapacity. There's a lot of surprises. There's a high risk. There's nothing conservative about the business that we're in. But basically, we hold back until we are absolutely sure that our job is done. Then we will sit back and we will celebrate.
After the initial successes of these shuttle missions, NASA felt that they were safe enough to include non-astronaut civilians. They introduced the Teacher in Space program and chose a woman teacher, Krista McAuliffe, to participate in the 51L shuttle flight. Judy Resnick, the second American woman in space, was also chosen to be part of this crew. Amidst the greatest fanfare and media coverage since the moon mission of Apollo 11, the shuttle Challenger was scheduled to launch on that fateful day in January 1986.
Understand, we are human, we're only beginning. Any dream that you dream is there for the winning. Lean into the future, gaze into the stars, blazing through the new frontiers of life. Oh, our moments crowning glory, time carries on, except memories gently landing. Don't you see? We are free because of new heroes. So don't cry, please don't cry, look to the sky. Remember your heroes. Remember your heroes. Remember new heroes.
through the pain, our hearts have been opened to a profound truth. The future is not free. The story of all human progress is one of a struggle against all odds. We learned again that this America, which Abraham Lincoln called the last best hope of man on earth, was built on heroism and noble sacrifice. It was built by men and women like our 7-star Voyagers, who answered a call beyond duty, who gave more than was expected or required, and who gave it little thought of worldly reward.
President Reagan told me, Dr. Resnick, do you want the program to continue? And I said, absolutely. If you stop the program now, these 7 will have given their lives in vain.
If you look back at our history, the way we've made gains is through learning through failure and learning to go on and fix it and get on about our business. To me, the Challenger accident drew a lot of attention, and it should have, and it was a terrible tragedy. But it's something that we ought to learn from and press on, and not to turn away from taking those risks when the gain's worth it.
After almost 2 years of delay, NASA and the other women astronauts did not lose their courage for the future and have continued their exploration of space with renewed vigor for the challenges that lay ahead. And even though they were not publicity seekers, the performances of these first women astronauts were scrutinized closely by everyone questioning the role of women in space. It was the pioneering spirit of these women that led to other women achieving their dreams in the space program, including Dr. Mae Jemison and Dr. Ellen Ochoa.
I guess that we were pioneers in some sense. We certainly blazed the way for other women in the space program. And all you need to do is look at the numbers of women astronauts who've come in the program since the groups that came in 78 and 80 to see that, that we've been very successful in that. Apparently we did the job well enough that NASA was more than willing to continue to bring women into the astronaut program.
Judy wanted to be remembered not necessarily as a pioneer in the space program. She said she just loved the work, and she wanted to contribute whatever she could as far as the program was concerned. She just wanted to be known as an astronaut who did her job.
I had read and heard about these people when I was younger. As a lieutenant in the Air Force, I'd seen them on TV. I had seen Judy Resnick and Sally Ride on television. They had inspired me. I'd met Sally Ride at an appearance briefly. I was one of the thousands of people that went up and shook her hand. Just meeting them alone was enough of a motivation to me. Hey, they've done this, they've been there, they've obviously survived, they're happy, they're enjoying their jobs, and that was enough for me.
Being a role model, it's sort of scary at times. I mean, you're having a tremendous impact on kids, and you want to try to do something positive. I talk to schools a lot. You know, I always figure if I can get just one kid in there to think about doing their math or science homework, or preferably both, then it was worth the time and it was worthwhile.
Women have recovered well from 2 decades of exclusion as astronauts and are now considered equal partners in the exploration of space.
I think that all of NASA actually went to a great deal of effort to make sure that, that the trail was blazed actually before we got there. I don't think that we get to take all the credit as, you know, as the only pioneers. I think NASA deserves a lot of the credit.
There are, however, still other milestones and firsts to be made by women, such as serving as shuttle pilot and shuttle commander.
Being a shuttle pilot is a very difficult job. I do feel extra pressure being the first woman pilot. There is no doubt in my mind there's a lot of people that are watching me. But I like pressure, and I think I operate better under pressure. One of my long-term goals in my career is to be a shuttle commander. I would like to do that. To be a shuttle commander, you really need to earn that job because it is quite a distinction and with a tremendous amount of responsibility and something that we don't take lightly.
With an almost prophetic sense of accuracy, husband and wife astronauts Anna and Bill Fisher foresaw the emerging role of women as active participants in space exploration over 5 years before Sally Ride's historic flight in space.
I feel that the exploration of any new frontier in history and the past has always been shared by both men and women, and I think that space is no exception, and I think women will be able to do as good a job as men, and it's something that should be done together.
Well, I think that the human race has its destiny in space, and I don't think it's fair to say that only half the human race should go. I think this is going to be an endeavor that's going to involve everyone. And certainly women aren't going to be excluded from that. I think there'll be no difference in participation, and we'll live to see that within the next 15 or 20 years.
Because the human race, maybe it's not tomorrow or next year, but the human race is heading toward the solar system and the stars. That is where the human spirit is going to lead. And for those kids who have the sense of adventure, and those kids who are the sons and daughters or grandsons of pioneers, those children who look up at the sky at night and get a funny feeling in the pit of their stomachs, yes, I would say go forward and follow your dream.
Just as the astronauts of today watched in awe and amazement as school children at the first manned space flights, it is altogether possible that the school children of today will themselves be pioneers in colonies on other planets or permanent space stations. These extraterrestrial colonies will be far too demanding and the challenges far too great to allow the abilities and talents of any individual to be wasted, regardless of sex.
Today, America is perhaps even unique in the world in terms of being able to double the potential of the brain power by including women, compared to a lot of the other countries in the world with whom it is clear we are competing economically. Other countries are nowhere near as successful for whatever reasons, probably most of which are cultural, but for whatever reasons, they are not able to adapt and to integrate women into the workplace as effectively, I don't think, as we have in the United States.
I really do think in many ways NASA is a reflection of an improving picture across the nation, may even be a model to look at. In the late 50s, early 60s, NASA was a all-white male show, and it took time to get people that would have the right kind of backgrounds. But today, I believe NASA has got as many women in important places as the rest of our society. Carolyn Huntoon has broken through at the Johnson Space Center. There will be others that come up. And at that top level, as soon as that's done, I could see even a woman running NASA.
The original 6 women, as we call them, and then the 2 that came in the following year or so, were indeed pioneers. The women had a particularly specific job to do, and that was be the best they could be, and be good astronauts, and make those things mesh so that what has happened because of their work. Today, people do not think too much about there's a woman on board the shuttle, or there's 2 women on board the shuttle. They think there's a crew up there, and that was our goal from the beginning, and I think we've achieved that goal.
Thanks in large part to the dedication, professionalism, and sacrifices of these first 8 women astronauts, both men and women will be working shoulder to shoulder on the frontier of tomorrow in the exploration of our solar system and beyond.
As I watch the earth below me from the corner of my eye, racing just outside my window, the phantoms of the night. For a moment